Welcome back to another edition of the Friday Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Johnson, and I am joined today by Joseph LaMagna. Joseph, you're actually kind of the host of this podcast today.
No, this is all you. I just got to interview Dodo, which I hope people like.
So yeah, this is Joseph took the reins on the interview front. Interviewed Dodo Molinari, obviously a long-time European Tour player, but now kind of one of the people on the forefront of golf analytics. Joseph, you are on the forefront of golf analytics too. So this is going to get deep in the weeds on golf analytics and many other topics. But big thanks to Dodo for coming on and chatting with you. Let's do in out, and we'll do recommendations at the end of this podcast. Joseph, what are you in on?
My in and my out are kind of related, but what I'm in on is Braden Thornberry and seeing him get it done in the Ferry Tour finals yesterday. He's had a rocky year, and he's also just had generally a pretty up and down start to his professional career after an unbelievable amateur career. He was a Haskins winner, won the NCAAs, was a Walker Cupper on the same team as Morikawa and Scheffler and Will Zalatoris. He struggled to find his footing and came into yesterday with a very outside chance of getting his PGA Tour card, and he got it done. It was cool to see him get choked up and talk about basically things haven't gone his way the last couple of years, and it's nice to finally have something go his way. Seems like a cool, down-to-earth dude who now has his PGA Tour status locked up for next year. Was extremely satisfying watching him win.
This is a guy that if you had changed the way that the PGA Tour used PGA Tour U, like he's a couple of years, maybe a year or two before the start of PGA Tour U. But if you went back and redid that, he would have had like a PGA Tour card. He was sensational his senior year. He was the best player in college golf, and it wasn't even close. So this is a guy that it just shows how hard it can be to make the tour. It can be a matter of you have a bad week at the wrong time. You fall into a rut. You play your best golf at inopportune times. Like we saw that with Hideki Matsuyama. I always think about this. Like when he rattled off 4 of 6 wins in 2016, I believe, the winter. It was like, oh, like this guy's the best player in the world, but he's playing at his best golf of his career at the wrong time. You know, it's like just there's nothing consequential. Braden Thornberry, I mean, he's played everywhere. I think he was playing on like the All Pro Tour at one point. This is not something you usually see of a Haskins Award winner, of the best player in college golf, especially in this era. I think long term, these types of things can be a blessing in disguise. It could give him a little bit more juice, a little more, I guess, motivation, because I'm sure he had some moments where he felt the bottom, where he's watching guys that he used to compete, probably beat a lot, have huge success on television on the PGA Tour. Congrats to Braden Thornberry. Great moment.
Yeah, and he's 27, Andy, so it's not like he can get polished, and this could be the next 5 years, could be a really good period of golf for Braden Thornberry. So excited for him. What are you in on?
I'm in on golf courses mattering. I think we talk about this a decent amount on this podcast, but I found it to be just like a fascinating juxtaposition between the end of the Dunhill and the end of the Sanderson. I want to be clear, both of them were really good finishes, but one had just an extra dimension than the other. The weather was gnarly in Scotland. The weather was gnarly, and players were playing down one of the most historic back nines in all of golf. They were battling, and it was very much of a kind of just hang on for dear life situation because the wind and everything that went into it. We saw Bob McIntyre just go off about the 17th hole at St. Andrews, a player that was in the mix, saying it should be blown up, redone. It's preposterous that I had to hit a 4-iron into the green. This is what we want. This is what we want from pro golf. We want the golf course to be holding up. And I think the old course was a great example. The day before, in pretty benign conditions, players were just going nuts and beating it up. And then the wind comes out and the rain comes and it's as much as they can handle. But like them hitting a 4-iron, this is a quarterback in the NFL going against a great defense. The golf course matters. It adds an additional layer. The finish to the Sanderson was great, but it was more of, here are a couple players that don't usually win trying to get it done. There was no added element of the golf course is presenting a really tough test and standing in the way of them getting it done. And I think that's the thing that you had with Tyrrell Hatton, Cole Starts, going back and forth down the stretch. It was, Hatton opened up a lead, but then, you turned and went back into the wind on the back nine. It was really hard. And Cole Starts was hitting great golf shots. And then it comes down to 18. Hatton gets up and down for the birdie. Cole Starts doesn't. He wins. It was a sensational finish to the Dunhill, and the golf course amplified it. So this is not necessarily a shot at Country Club of Jackson, which is maybe one of the most bland golf courses I've ever seen on TV. But
not a shot.
They shouldn't be hosting PGA Tour events at courses like this. And I understand there might not be a better host in Jackson, Mississippi, but if you're going to take in a couple $1 billion from outside investors, this is something to look at. There is another added layer of interest when these players play at really great golf courses. So when you have $3 billion in the bank or whatever they're going to have if this PIF deal comes in, I think something they should really genuinely kick the can down the curb on is, how do we play, or create? I think this is something that'd be worthwhile to look at. Create worthwhile venues. And if they're going to do that, I don't think the TPC network can be involved. So that I loved the finish of the Dunhill links.
That was well said. The only thing I'll add is Country Club of Jackson's a pretty good example of a golf course that has narrow fairways and doesn't test accuracy at all. Kind of to your point, right? Like Bo Hostler and Kevin Yu are some players with firepower who do not hit the ball particularly straight. And this is one of those that I think if you're into numbers and stuff, it comes up frequently, right? Like you can kind of hit it anywhere out there. So good one for people to look at that. We kind of talked about this in the pod with Dodo a little bit, but that's a good template of a golf course that maybe looks on paper like it tests accuracy, but doesn't at all. And kind of goes to your point that that's just not a great PGA Tour test, Andy.
Yeah. I mean, all this stuff matters. It goes down to like the Korn Ferry Tour, where courses are not really indicative of skill. It's mostly just driver wedge fest there. It's not, they don't play a lot of golf courses where you got to hit a high towering 7-iron. And this used to be a 4-iron, by the way, but a high towering cut 7-iron into a tuck pin. Like it's mostly just bash the driver up there and hit your 60 degree. And all this stuff matters and how it relates to competition at the highest level and when everything gets ratcheted up. So what are you out on?
I'm coming after a shotgun start, something that you guys enjoy. So I apologize in advance.
Champions Tour?
I'm coming after the Champions Tour.
God, you're doing it well. PJ's in producer mode. He can't even come on and defend it.
The Champions Tour's got to go. Watching Korn Ferry Tour guys who are trying to make their living, and you have the International Series on the Asian Tour, Challenge Tour, like these young golfers are having trouble making a living, and watching Rocco Mediate cash a $315,000 check from Furyk and friends yesterday, it just cannot be an efficient use of the PGA Tour's resources. Not even to mention, I think the golf world has a little bit of a star building issue that some of these young guys come out on tour and people don't know who they are, there's probably an opportunity to divert some of those Champions Tour resources into building the Korn Ferry Tour and building college golf. Like, college golf isn't even really on people's radar. And I think that's something that could be an engaging avenue for the golf world to go down, is to put some money into that and maybe not into this. I don't know. It basically feels like televising adult rec league softball at this point for me. I can't believe that the purses are as big as they are for Champions Tour events. That whole operation needs to go away.
I agree with what you're saying. Sorry, PJ. I've been watching more Champions Tour golf lately just because of our stupid bit on the shotgun start. But I would totally agree with the idea of the star building. I think this is something that the PGA Tour really, really has to think about. The sport's getting young and athletic, and younger every year. One of the tough things about that is like the awareness of young golfers is extraordinarily low. So if that's the case, if you're having trouble with awareness of like, who is Kevin Yu, for example, a great young player who was a great player at Arizona State and has basically breezed up to the highest level of golf. He took his PGA Tour exemption out of the Korn Ferry Tour, turned it into a PGA Tour card in 1 year, and then has won on the PGA Tour in his first year on the PGA Tour. 99% of golf fans have no clue who Kevin Yu is. And he would have been a absolute superstar in college golf. He was a superstar in college golf. The problem is 2,000 people in the world might care about college golf. So that is the real issue, and the tour has to address that. The Champions Tour is effectively a roughly $65 million subsidy. They just subsidize the tour. If you took $65 million and put it into the Korn Ferry, you'd have every single event would be televised and broadcasted live. You'd have enough money to pour down into televising maybe a handful of elite amateur events and more college events, which, to your point, you're building your stars. You are just building the awareness up so that when Kevin Yu wins at age, what is he, 25? It's
Kevin
not
Yu's
who is
26.
It's not who is Kevin Yu. It is, you know what? We've watched this kid from when he was one of the best players in college golf to when he was one of the best players in Korn Ferry on the Korn Ferry Tour. We have the other aspect of this is we have a trove of assets, like footage of them playing at all these stages, and we can show you how good of a player. Like, it is not just we're putting this on. It is gathering the requisite assets and having your people, be ingrained. Like they have this huge organization, but outside of Sean Martin and maybe a handful of others, nobody pays attention to what's going on in college golf because it's not their job. This would make it part of their job, and they would just get better at covering the young players in the sport. There'd be more context. There'd just be more understanding.
And the whole point of competitive sports, right, is you want to be watching the best or people who are on track to be the best. Like, I can't think of another league that people watch where everyone is clearly past their primes and is not going to be competing again. So it just feels like an obvious waste of money that the PGA Tour should be looking into. All right, what are you out on, Andy?
I'm out on the treatment. This is similar to the treatment of the Korn Ferry Tour. The Korn Ferry Tour Championship is that was played this weekend is one of the best days in golf, the best weekends in golf. I think when pro golf really thrives, when it's at its best, besides the majors, if you take out the major championships, the most compelling aspect of pro golf is relegation and promotion. And it goes to vying for Ryder Cup spots. I would consider that kind of relegation and promotion. That's more of a promotion. Like, hey, you've been put on this pedestal. Down to relegation promotion from the PGA Tour, Korn Ferry Tour, and you could even go down to the Americas Tour. We're not anywhere close to seeing that, but that's another fascinating aspect. So the Korn Ferry Tour, 30 cards are handed out. It is, I would say, probably a top for, listen, like passerbys aren't watching golf outside of the top 5 or 6 events, outside of like the Ryder Cup, the majors, maybe the Players, President's Cup. So once you get to like event, I don't know, 13, 12, 13, this is probably in like the top 15 golf events on the men's golf events on the calendar. This is a top 15 event. Please find a better slot for it. You just cannot run it up, at noon on a Sunday against the NFL. You cannot. The television broadcast calendar, this is finishing. The most compelling event comes at the end of the afternoon, or the first slate of football games, the most football games. Give this a chance. I thought the venue was really great. French Lick, the Pete Dye course, is a really interesting golf course. It's a big boy golf course. It's a golf course that type of shots you would see high level tour events, high level tour course. It just needs to, this tournament should be covered. It should have its own week. It shouldn't go opposite Sanderson. It should have its own week and really be put up front for the PGA Tour, because it is one of their best events. So I think that the tour really needs to look at their assets, look at what events they have, and construct a calendar based off of hey, I know this isn't a PGA Tour event, but this is one of the best things we have going. And if we prioritize it, it's another potential, $100 million plus franchise. If we can do this right. And this goes back to kind of what you talked about. But this would make the Korn Ferry, the more compelling the final event is, the more compelling every other Korn Ferry Tour event is.
Yeah, I think one of the sneaky best golf days of the year, Andy, is US Open final qualifying, which has a similar vibe where it's the golfers are getting a life-changing result that day, right? And battling down to the wire. That usually wraps up on Monday night. I think there's probably an opportunity for the Korn Ferry Tour to maybe explore not finishing their events on Sundays. I would think that if the Korn Ferry Tour wrapped up on a Monday evening, there'd be a lot more interest, or a Tuesday evening. So I think that could be something to explore, but I agree with you. It should be highlighted way more than it is. It's a pretty special closing stretch to watch. Just nobody was watching it.
I really like the course. But that being said, I think we talk about this a lot. I think the PGA Tour is actually exploring the potential of getting some West Coast playoff events, like we've talked about for years. But the idea of being able to get this on the West Coast and maybe finishing on, you do Saturday through Tuesday in prime time. That there's no football on Tuesday night this time of year. And you go, it's that would be great. You get the primetime slot on a Tuesday. I mean, I know golfers didn't really like TPC Stonebrae. I was thinking that would be a solution, but I know a lot of the Korn Ferry Tour players didn't love it. But find a good venue and have it there. I mean, I know Chambers Bay is actively looking for things to host.
That'd be so sick. Korn Ferry Tour finals at Chambers Bay would be sweet.
I mean, they're talking to Live. I think they would love to have the Korn Ferry Tour finals if they're talking to Live. All right, let's get to Dodo Molinari. First, let's talk about True Golf. All right, you may not have heard of True Golf before. They have a product called Launchbox by True Golf. And this is an all-new portable launch monitor and golf simulator from True Golf. It's super easy to use. It seamlessly connects to your PC or iOS device, makes it easy to play golf courses and improve your game year-round. Launchbox by True Golf offers a simple setup, instant shot registration, accurate measured data, an easy Wi-Fi connection, and is optimized for indoor use and can be used on range mats outdoors. So you can turn your swings at the range into detailed feedback, giving you meaningful insight into your game, helping you optimize practice and focus on improvement. I need to do some of this winter. You can also work on your golf course strategy with Launchbox. This setup lets you explore some of the best courses in the world that have been meticulously recreated with E6 Connect. Each virtual recreation is mapped, scanned, and digitized to be accurate within millimeters of its real-world counterpart. Launchbox by True Golf is engineered for accuracy and designed for ease. Learn more at truegolf.com. That's TRUGOLF.com/egg. All right, let's get to Dodo Molinari.
Okay, we are joined by Edoardo Molinari, a man of many titles, active member of the DP World Tour, currently playing a full schedule, Chief Data Strategist and Vice Captain for Ryder Cup Team Europe. And you founded a stats business. Now I believe you are partnered with Arcos Golf, which we'll try to get to a little bit of all of that. Thanks for joining amidst a busy DP World Tour schedule. How you doing, Edoardo?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to speak about these things, and I'm really looking forward to this.
So the golden source of golf information, I was reading on Wikipedia that you are considered one of the most emotional players on the European Tour and one of the most attractive players on the DP World Tour. I have to ask, are you editing your own Wikipedia page?
I am not. There's a lot of lies in Wikipedia. Fake news.
So I want to get into some of the data and some of the Ryder Cup stuff a little bit towards the end. But first, I wanted to start with your background. How did you get started playing golf? And you grew up in Turin, Italy. What did the youth golf landscape look like there, and what was your introduction to the game?
Well, basically, my parents used to play golf. They were members at a local golf club, one of the best in town, which is more like a country club. So when Francesco and I were about 7-8 years old, we started to go to the golf course with them. We would play some golf with other kids. We would spend some time in the swimming pool. We would play some soccer, just, basically spend the weekend outdoor rather than in front of a PlayStation. And that's how we started. I mean, mom and dad were both at the time like single digit handicaps. So we just, went with them, but for them, like, it was always school came first. And then if you could play good golf, great. But if not, you had to be successful in school.
When did you know that professional golf was a realistic outcome for you versus, I'm sure you were always focusing on your studies, but when did that attention turn to professional golf?
Quite late, I would say, probably in my second or third year in university. I went to college in Torino and I studied engineering. And when I started, I had no intention at all of turning pro. I was a good amateur, but it was nothing extremely good. The thing is, I was only playing a couple of times a week at the time. And then when I started college, I started to play 3-4 times a week. And then I started to get better pretty quickly. So towards between the middle and the end of my college career, I said, well, I want to finish this first, and then I want to give it a try at golf. But it wasn't something that, I wasn't like one of those kids that when they're like 16 or 17, everyone thinks, oh, this is going to be unbelievable. So then my very last year in college, I was playing good golf. I qualified for the Open Championship. And then I made the cut at St. Andrews. And then straight after that, it was the US Amateur Qualifier. At the time, there was no World Amateur rankings or anything. So I just flew across, won the qualifier, back home for a couple of weeks, back to Marion to play the US Am, and then won the US Am, which obviously, opened 1,000 doors and a lot of opportunities. And it was the best thing that could happen to my golfing career. So then I had to wait another 9 months, because obviously you don't want to turn down the opportunity to play in the Masters, in the US Open, in the Open Championship again. And then I turned pro the following year after the Open Championship.
Yeah, I think you might be being humble here with your response and downplaying your career. We're going to talk a lot about data and analytics, but I didn't want to overlook the success of your amateur and professional career. Had the 2005 US Amateur at Marion noted. You were the first golfer from continental Europe to win that event. And like you mentioned, that got you into the 2006 Masters, where you were paired in the first 2 rounds with Tiger Woods and Robert Allenby. And I believe your brother, Francesco, who you'd mentioned, obviously a great professional golfer and major championship winner, was on the bag for you that week. Pretty incredible set of circumstances for your first Masters. Wanted to ask what you remember about that week.
It was an incredible week. The thing is, when you win the US, I didn't know this until I won the US Amateur, but when you win the US Amateur, you play the following year the Masters with the defending champion. And Tiger happened to win in 2005. So basically, I was waiting for this tea time with Tiger, the Masters, for like 6-7 months. And I just remember, obviously, I remember taking a lot of notes from the week. A friend of mine said you should write them down. And I think it was a great idea, because I still had this like small diary with some thoughts and things that happened that, almost 20 years down the line, you're starting to forget. The feeling was very weird, to be honest. I remember not even being nervous on the first tee. It was like something between a dream, a movie set. It was just very, very weird. Like a lot of people around the tee, obviously on the first hole, playing with Tiger. And he introduces himself like every other golfer. Hi, Tiger Woods, nice to meet you. And it was weird. Francesco was caddying, and I remember, anytime Tiger went into a greenside bunker, he was the first one to be right next to him, trying to clean his ball and it was just an experience for both of us, which made me realize, that obviously even if I won USAM, I was still far, far away from, being able to compete in a major championship. But also you just see other people play, you see those kind of courses that, as an amateur, you not even dream about playing in the Masters. And it was an unbelievable experience.
People talk a lot about the pressure of making your Masters debut. Obviously, the fashion in which you made your debut was heightened playing with Tiger Woods. Do you think it's possible for a golfer to play well in a circumstance like that? Or are you so out of your own body that it's not even a realistic expectation for you to put on a good performance that week?
I think it is possible, but I think that's going well above and beyond your expectations. Again, as an amateur, especially if you think about 20 years ago, the biggest tournament I played was the Italian Open, which is like a middle tier event on the DP World Tour. So all of a sudden you're playing Augusta on greens that, probably the quickest green I've seen was 10.5 at the time, and all of a sudden it's like 12.5 to 13. So everything is so difficult. I try to play quite a few practice rounds in the weeks before, in the days before. But the problem with Augusta is that the course tend to change a lot even from Wednesday to Thursday. I remember on Wednesday playing with Sergio, Olazabal, and maybe Cabrera at the time. And I felt, the golf course is not too difficult. The greens are still receptive enough. And then you show up on the putting green on Thursday morning, and all of a sudden the greens became brown. And it's like, 12 hours ago it was fine, and now it's just completely out of control. So it was, it's always an experience, and it's something that, some people might tell you, tomorrow is going to be firmer and faster. But until you see how much of a difference they can make in 24 hours, it's really difficult to believe. And I think that's part of the reason why anyone playing the first Masters has a massive disadvantage, because it's difficult to imagine how the golfer is going to play until you actually see it with your own eyes.
Generally speaking, Edoardo, and we'll get into some data-related concepts and strategy here in a bit, but when a golf course changes that much, how much do you think that should change the way that a golfer attacks that golf course, right? Whether it's being aggressive on approach shots, off the tee strategy, or in your opinion, yes, the golf course is playing quite differently, but you're still adhering to a lot of those same principles.
I would say you apply the same principles, but everything is just more extreme. So obviously a short-sighted miss that, on the Wednesday or the Tuesday wasn't too bad. All of a sudden on Thursday, it's basically a full shot gone. So I would say in general, you have to play a little bit more conservative when it becomes so firm and fast. You get exposed, like bad shots get exposed a lot more. You just have to be in full control of your game. And I think it's a great way to separate the best players in the field to someone that is playing average golf. I would say it's much more difficult to separate players on a soft golf course or a slow golf course for sure.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit towards some of those data-related concepts, something that you've established a strong reputation for, not just with your own statistics business, but your involvement in the Ryder Cup, which we'll get to at the end. You have a technical background with a PhD in engineering. Can you give us some background on how you became interested in golf data and when that passion turned into a formal business?
Yeah, so as I said, I was studying engineering in college. So I was always into numbers, stats, and all those things. Towards the end of my engineering career, I thought that it would be a good idea to start tracking stats about my own game. So I started developing a very simple Excel spreadsheet at the time, where I could record fairways, greens, number of putts. It was extremely simple in the beginning. And then, like everything I do, I try to make it a little bit better, each week, each month. And it became quite a big thing after a few years. Then I met Mark Brody at the beginning of 2011. And that's when the strokes gained putting came out on the PGA Tour for the first time. So I just read the article. I looked for the guy behind it. I sent him an email. We met a few weeks later in Florida, and since then we've been good friends. We spend a lot of time together. We try to chat as much as we can. So fast forward 2019. So I started collecting my own data in 2003. So then about 16, 17 years later, there were a few guys in Europe that were looking for some sort of system to collect their stats. There was one company at the time working in Europe, which you might know. And then the thing with me is everything I had done until then was written in Excel. It was all in Italian. It was very clumsy to enter the data, so it was difficult for anyone else to use it. And then COVID happened. So during COVID, I basically had 3-4 months at home, no tournaments, nothing to do. Where, in the beginning I said, well, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to start building something that more players can use, and, we can do reports and we can make it a bit easier to analyze and to read and to use. And then during COVID, I remember speaking to Phil Kenyon, and Phil obviously is a great putting coach and he has a bunch of top players. And I said to Phil, look, I'm building this. If you have any ideas, any feedback that you would like to add, I'm very happy to, because I'm, literally building it from scratch. And then B, if you think about any of your players that might be interested, then I'd like to talk to them. And a few days later, he put me in touch with Matt Fitzpatrick. And when I showed what I was doing to Matt, he was immediately blown away. And he said, well, he wasn't even finished at the time, but he said, this is going to be so good and I trust you so much that I don't care how much this costs, how much you charge me. I just want to use it. Perfect. So then he was my first client when Player started after COVID. And I thought, once I get to 10 players in a couple of years, that's it. I won't be managing more than 10 players, and as simple as that. And then Matt started to play really well. He had a few interviews where he talked about me. And then within, I want to say 8 or 9 weeks, I was up at 10 players, and there were more and more coming in. So then I had to hire one person, then a second person to help me with some, day-to-day stuff. So I could still, basically what I'm doing now is I have 3 people helping with the basic stuff. And I like to spend my time still, thinking about new ideas or new stuff you can do with the data. So I split my time between still developing some things and helping players with the analytics. And as you said, it's become quite a big business because it started as a hobby. Then I said it was my retirement plan, and now it's pretty much my major job.
So this is a huge and broad question that might be difficult to answer, but if you had to distill the insights from looking at that data into 1 or 2 key insights from this period of data advancement and the evolution of course management, what would you say that those insights might be? And based on your answer, I might have a couple follow-up questions there, but not to lead the witness here, right? Like disaster avoidance and aiming away from hazards. Like how would you describe those key insights that players have internalized to shoot better scores?
There's a lot. I would say the most common one, especially for tour players, is being way too conservative off the tee. Like a lot of guys like to, lay up with a 3-wood or a 2-iron on some holes. And it just, when you actually look at the numbers and you show them the numbers, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's probably that's the most common mistake. The other common one that I found in many, many cases is the opposite one, is being overly aggressive with approach shots, like taking on some pins that doesn't make any sense to take on. I would say for the elite players, that's the 2 most common ones. And then there's a very strange one, which is, it's not really a mistake, but it's like, as a player, you have no idea about your misses, about what you're good at, what you're not so good at. You might have a rough idea, but once, if I start asking you, are you better on left to right putts or right to left putts, I can bet pretty much all the money I have that most players don't really have a clue. And sometimes I was the same myself before collecting all this data. I was just, sometimes I was looking at it, and I remember one time going for a putting lesson to Phil Kenyon, and he says to me, what's your common mistake in putting? And I said, well, Phil, I'm missing everything to the right. Like any bad putt is always to the right, and whether it's a left to right, a right to left, it's always to the right. And it was like very early days in my, stats thing. So I didn't really have good stats about my putting. So I started to backtrace, and I had a look at the last 6 months prior to that lesson, if I was missing more to the left or more to the right. And on any break from any distance, it doesn't matter the type of grass, the speed of the greens, anything, I was missing 2 times more often to the left than to the right. And I was convinced as a player that it was the opposite. Probably because I missed a couple of short putts to the right, or a putt that, to make the cut or to win a tournament to the right. And then in your mind, you just create these stories that it's very difficult to eradicate from a player's mind. But when you actually look at the data, it's like, right, hang on a minute, I missed 2 putts to the right, but, in the 3 rounds prior to that, I missed 8 putts to the left. So I'm actually missing more left than right. And I think that's something that, again, without collecting data, it might be on your putting, it might be a long game, it might be whatever. There might be a player that is convinced that his 3-wood is fantastic, and then you look at the numbers and the dispersion is actually worse than the driver. It's just very difficult as a player to have a neutral eye and an opinion on your game.
I want to get into a hot button topic here, especially for our audience, which is very architecturally interested. And do you have a guess? Do you have a guess where I'm going with this?
Angles.
It's data related. There we go. Angles, right? So before we even, I will just open the floor to you. When you hear the discussion around angles, I think there's kind of 2 different topics here. One is, do angles matter at all? And one is, are they worth pursuing, right? Can you just offer your perspective maybe on both of those
Yeah,
separate but related topics?
Yeah, I think the two are very linked. I would say on 99% of courses and golf holes, angles don't matter at all. Simply because, well, there's various ways to look at it, but if you look at scoring average on certain holes of ShotLink, you got millions of shots. And then you look at the scoring average from the middle of the fairway, the right side, the left side, into right pins, left pins, middle pins. Basically, it doesn't change. Yeah, because I think the thing is, what you gain a little bit being on the right angle of the hole, on the right side of the hole, as most people think, or when you see on TV, you hear about angles a lot. I feel like what you gain being on the good side of the hole, you lose it because all of a sudden the hazard becomes more on the side. And again, as golf professional, it's much easier to go over water than to go on a hole with water on the side of the green. So obviously we're talking small margins, but what you gain on one side, you lose it on the other. So it's, at the end of the day, angles don't matter one bit. Now, I would say the only time where they do matter a bit is that if you're in the rough, sometimes you're in the left rough and you have a slightly better way into the green, or angle, if you want to say, than the right side. But again, it doesn't make any sense to chase an angle because you think, oh, I'm going to have an easier second shot. Because at the end of the day, being on the fairway, even if it's on the wrong side of the fairway, it's always better than being on the, in the rough on the right side of the hole. Now there's a few. Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I had looked at, I don't know, it might have been 50 to 100,000 shots, and basically found that if you have a lot of green to work with a long iron from the fairway, it was worth about 1/10 of a shot of an advantage versus if you didn't have a lot of green to work with, which is one way of thinking about the angle question there, right? And so if you think about the typical penalty associated with the rough, it's much higher than 1/10 of a shot generally. So the more you try to gain that 1/10 of a shot of an advantage, you bring in more risk of finding the rough, therefore it's not worth it. Is that a reasonable way to summarize some of those findings?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, like the penalty for being in the rough on pretty much every golf hole in the world is higher than the penalty or the advantage you gain by having a slightly better angle. And again, as you said, like slightly better angles only matter in a small percentage of golf holes. Like it needs to be a long hole, you need to have green to work with, it needs to be probably a firm green as well. It needs to be a very wide fairway. Like the only course I can think of where the angle matter a little bit is the Old Course at St Andrews. But there you have like 90 yards wide fairway in some cases. So obviously from being 50 yards right of center or 40 yards left of center, the second shot changes dramatically, up to the point where from the left side you might have to go over a bunker to a firm green to a short pin, so it's unstoppable. While from the right side, the bunker is not even in play. But again, how many courses there are in the world like the Old Course? Probably, less than 5. So I think at the end of the day, as we said, in most cases, they don't really matter.
So I think that is a very unsatisfying answer for a lot of people who have a passion for golf course architecture. And so part of what you're hitting on is it is part of a function of the golf courses they play, right? And if every golf course looked like St. Andrews, then we would probably talk about angles a little bit differently. My question to you would be, if you were tasked with building a golf course to test the modern professional golfer that maximized strategy, it also was a demanding test, it maximized shot value, what would that golf course look like? What are some of those architectural features that you found to be a strong test for professionals that are engaging mentally, right? It's not just this rip it down the center of the fairway with a stock fade.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, give you options of the tee. So make you think a lot of the tee. I think a lot of courses we play these days, just you stand on the tee, you hit driver down the middle, you go there, you find where it is, and you keep going. And I think to test the golfers of the tee, you have to have increasing penalties as you move further away from the fairway. So if I miss the fairway by 5 yards, I should be penalized a little bit. If I miss the fairway by 30 yards, I should be penalized a lot more. And if I miss it by 60 yards, I'm not saying it should be automatic OB, but it should be like something similar. And I think of all the courses on the PGA Tour, Augusta National, I think it's a great golf course off the tee because it's kind of designed in that way. Like if you hit a good tee shot, if you're a good driver of the golf ball at Augusta National, you have a great chance to win. If you don't drive the golf ball well, you don't stand a chance. It's as simple as that. I think what I don't like about Augusta, I think sometimes the second shots are built in a way where there's too much of a fine line between a great shot and a poor result. If you think about, especially hole 13, I think that's a bit extreme sometimes, where you're hitting like a long iron off a side slope into a green, and then the difference between pitching it on the green or 2 yards short is like between a 3 and a 6. I think that sometimes it's 15 as well. I think sometimes that's a little bit too much, but I think off the tee, Augusta National is as good as a test of a modern golfer as they come. Like I hate when you see a golf course where everyone is just bombing driver and there's not much consequence, whether you're on the fairway, whether you're in the rough. Yes, you lose a little bit if you're in the rough, but not so much. And I think the way Augusta is built is, you need to be in position of the tee in order to have a chance to hit the second shot close. And the more you move away from the middle of the fairway, the more trouble you're going to encounter. And I think
okay, two things there.
Yeah.
Two things there. One, a lot of people would say that at Augusta, you can spray the ball off of the tee. It's wide fairways. You don't need to be accurate. Edoardo, what is your response to that? I agree with you. You're already nodding your head.
No. I mean, I played Augusta
a few
times. Yeah, I played Augusta a few times, and the very first feeling I got the first time I played was, wow, this is difficult off the tee. Everyone was saying, oh, you can spray it everywhere. It's not. There are some tee shots that are quite generous. I give you that. But most of them, I mean, the first tee shot is very difficult. Is as difficult as a tee shot as they come in opening tee shots in major championship, I think. Because again, it's like the difference between a good tee shot and a bad tee shot it could be a lot. If you hit a good tee shot on the first, you're looking at, it's almost a birdie hole. Like it plays under par. As soon as you miss that fairway, you'll do very well to make a 4. And if you miss it by 20 yards each side, then you do very well to make a 5. And I think that's the typical characteristic of a good golf hole, I think. So I don't think it's, some of the landing areas, yes, are wide, but also the penalties around those landing areas are quite heavy. And so if you spray it around Augusta, maybe, again, I think the people are a bit, biased by when Tiger first came out. The golf course was much shorter. It was a lot wider. And the distance he was hitting the ball, you could hit it pretty much anywhere. Like on 18, he was flying it over the bunkers. And then, yes, you have 150 yards to play with there. But now you can't do it anymore. Now the landing area on the 18th is probably 25 yards wide, the actual landing area, because the right half of the fairway, you can't see the green. So I think it's a difficult course of the tee. Or at least I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's a course that separates a lot the good drivers from the poor ones.
Yeah, so I'd love to get your reaction to this. Rory McIlroy has had mixed results at Augusta National. Obviously, a player who hits the ball extremely long off the tee. I think sometimes he's described as more accurate off the tee than he should be. At least that's what I have seen. Yeah. And so I think there's a story to tell here that Rory, early in his career, Augusta National fit his game better, like you are mentioning, with how the course used to play for professional golfers versus now with this speed revolution and golfers hitting it a lot farther, Rory himself included, that his dispersion pattern doesn't fit on Augusta National as well as it would have at the beginning of his career. What is your reaction to that theory?
Yeah, I kind of agree with it. I think the issue with Rory at Augusta I think it's nearly being solved now, to be honest. I think in the last few years, excluding, say, the last couple of years, I would always see him play way too aggressive into the greens. Like he would often short side himself. Like if you look at Tiger around Augusta, I mean, he can make the cut one leg and with no back, and it doesn't matter, simply because he just plays in a way where he always leaves. If he misses a shot, he always leaves himself a chance to get up and down, which is the same thing that Scotty did so well this year when it was windy. I think it was the Saturday it was very windy. I can't remember exactly. There was one round where it was very windy and it was difficult for everyone, but Scotty was missing greens and he would always miss it on a side where he would have an up and down. And I think in previous years, I would obviously, I was hoping for Rory to win, and I'm still am, and I think he will. But I think he was just missing too often in places where there's no tomorrow. You're starting to make you can't make a par. You're starting to make a bogey. So I think one issue is that, and I think the other issue with Rory at Augusta, as you kind of mentioned before, is that he hits it very, very long. But I think compared to other players, even when he's playing well, he might still hit a bad shot that obviously gets punished at Augusta. Like if I see, the players of those caliber like John and Scotty and Brooks and DJ, when they're on and they're playing really well, I don't see many bad shots. While, with Rory, as good as he is, and, he's every bit as good as any one of these players, sometimes even when he's in contention, he still hits one shot that is like, 40 yards off line, and at Augusta you pay a big price for it. So I think it's a combination of things. I think I really like the way, I think it was not this year, but last year, that he started really to talk in his, pre-Masters press conference about trying to be more patient and try not to, play himself out of the tournament on day one, which happened before. Trying to accept that sometimes he just needs to go for the middle of the green and two putt and keep going. And I think that's the right mindset and the attitude to win a Masters. And I'm pretty confident that he's going to win one soon.
Sticking on the Rory subject just for a minute, and a high-profile scenario that he had earlier this year, there's sort of a debate that often happens when somebody fails, so to speak, in his position, which was a missed putt on the 72nd hole at the US Open at Pinehurst, right? He has a 4-foot downhill slider. Edoardo, you played in this tournament, so you're pretty familiar with those greens. When something like that happens, maybe you know where I'm going with this. Often people will start to say, like, well, he should have left himself below the hole. What is your reaction immediately when you hear that?
No, below the hole, well, obviously it would have been easier, yes. But then if he tries to leave himself below the hole on the chip shot, he might be 10 foot away. And all of a sudden, the make percentage from 10 foot, even from 6 feet or 7 feet versus a 4-footer downhill across the slope, the 4-footer is much easier. So you should always try to, be as close to the hole as possible. I think again with Rory at Pinehurst, I think the big mistake was on 16. The 3-putt, the bogey on 16 from basically the middle of the fairway with a short iron in hand. That second putt was again a 3-4-footer, but it was much easier than the one on 18. That's probably what cost him the US Open, I would say. And the other thing as well is that, you can talk as much as you want about that last round, but you cannot say that Rory putted poorly on that last round, because up until the 15th hole, he made basically every putt he could make in that round. He was very unlucky on the par 5 on the 5th hole, where he hit a good second shot and ended up making a 6. I mean, that was probably a foot away from being an easy 4. And again, I think people underestimate how difficult it is to win golf tournaments, especially majors, especially those big events. I mean, he hasn't won in 10 years now, but there's only 4 a year. There's a lot of, good players that are trying to win them. It's extremely difficult, and sometimes you need to be lucky at one point. And obviously, he's always been on the bad side recently. But I saw him last week at Wentworth, and I said to him, it was before he finished second again. He just finished second at the Irish Open. And I said to him, eventually, if you keep playing like this, eventually the wheel is going to turn, and you're going to be on the good side, and you're going to start winning, 5, 6, and 7 times in a year, like Scotty does. And he just laughed and he said, "Yeah, I know. I just have to be patient, and it's going to happen."
So I know what's going on in some people's heads when they hear your explanation right there, and what they will say, Dodo, is you're basing your analysis off of the average 4-footer, and that the 4-footer that Rory hit from above the hole on the 72nd green at Pinehurst, is way harder than the average 4-footer. And actually, you'd rather have a 7-footer uphill to win than to have that 4-foot slider. What is your advice, your reaction to that, but also your advice to junior golfers or anybody that's trying to play at a high level? Are you always trying to chip it as close to the hole as possible? Or would you concede that, hey, in extreme situations, when you play glassy, extremely undulating greens, somewhere like Augusta, somewhere like Pinehurst, you know what? There actually might be some situations where I'd rather have a 6-foot uphill putt than a 3.5-foot downhill slider. What's your perspective there?
Well, there are situations where you would like to have, or it's easier to have. I wouldn't say a 6-footer versus a 3-footer. Like it could be like I give you like a 5-footer at Augusta on, what's the slopiest green there? Say on 15 across the slope and down towards the water. That 5-footer is probably more difficult than the 6-footer straight uphill, maybe. But again, we're talking extreme situations where the average golfer would never encounter. Like on your golf course, as fast as the greens may be, as slopey as they may be, I think from short range at least, it's just the closest you are, the better it is. Now, if, from further away, obviously a 10-footer downhill on a super quick green, it's going to be probably more difficult than a 12-footer straight uphill or a 13-footer even. But then the thing is, if you're trying too much to leave yourself the uphill path, then all of a sudden you'll be putting all day from further away. And then it's not an effective strategy in the end. It's almost like you have to accept that sometimes you're going to have a 4-footer, across the slope downhill. And you just have to hope that it's not on the last hole of the US Open to make the playoff.
2 more questions for you before we get to a little bit of a Ryder Cup section, which I'm sure people are eager to hear your thoughts on the Ryder Cup. So you work not only with men's professional golfers, but with women as well. And I believe Nelly Korda is a player who you have a working relationship with.
Yep.
Obviously, she's had a phenomenal season, a breakout year. I would be interested, as you look at women's golf data compared to the men's golf data, do most of these same concepts apply? My intuition would be that they do, right? That they're too conservative off of the tees as well. But some people might argue, well, the women's game is different and they hit it more accurately off the tee, so they should hit driver less often. Like, what's your overall impression from analyzing both of those sets of data?
I would say very, very similar. Obviously, the women, like someone like Nelly, is incredibly accurate off the tee with driver. Obviously, she hits it longer than her competitors, but she's straighter than anything I've ever seen. Like I remember after the first few events, I got all the data and I created a report, and I had to check the report a couple of times because I thought there's no way she's hitting this many fairways. There's something wrong. But it's a driving machine. She's very, very good also with approach play. She was a bit like, I remember last year talking to his caddy as well, and she was a bit like Scotty. Like you could see the potential in Scotty, and the putter was letting him down. And Nelly was kind of similar. Like as soon as she has an average or good putting week, it's almost impossible for her to finish outside top 3. So she's an unbelievable golfer. But going back to your question, I think pretty much the same concept applies. Like even with them, you can see them sometimes they're too conservative off the tee, same as the men's. They should hit driver way more often. And sometimes, even someone like Nelly, that she hits the approach shots incredibly good, she sometimes can be a little, too aggressive into the greens. I think as golf professionals, you almost overestimate your ability with approach play, with being able to, there's a flag on the left side with water left, I'm just going to aim 2 yards right of it with a 7-iron. Sometimes, it's almost, I put it this way, it's almost impossible to be too conservative into the greens with your approach shots. Like you would have to be seriously aiming away from the pin way more than you think. And it's just very easy to become too aggressive. And if you're too aggressive, you usually pay a big price for it, especially in the big events.
So I read in a 2010 John Garrity Golf.com article that you were accustomed to hitting a draw off of the tee and then put in a significant amount of work to change over to hitting a fade with the driver. And I think something we've seen in the modern era is a lot of players having more success with a fade. My question to you is that actually just a realization of the best way to play golf, or is that also technology driven, that the modern driver, you're the right person to ask, because when you started playing golf and playing professionally in the early to mid 2000s, the driver technology has changed a lot to now. So was that inevitable that everyone was going to end up hitting a fade, or is that a byproduct of driver technology advancement?
I would say it's a byproduct of how the drivers are built these days. Obviously, the COG is very close to the face to reduce spin, maximize speed. And I think for some reason it's so difficult to hit a draw with the modern clubs, especially with the driver. I remember, again, going back to Rory, when he first came out, everything was like a slinging 25-yard draw, even off the tee. And then in time, like even now, when you see him hitting a driver on a good day or when he's playing well, it's a pretty neutral shape. And he was someone that he would sling it 20, 25 yards right to left. And his swing hasn't really changed much, maybe a little bit, but not that much. And when you look at, all the top drivers of the ball, I would say at least 80% hit it left to right. And they don't even try to hit it right to left. Like the most consistent of them, they all hit it left to right. And I think, again, it's something to do with how the driver is built. And also, I think swing-wise, it's probably a fade is a little bit more reliable than a draw.
Last part on this, we've heard from a number of professional golfers, especially who have played over the similar period of time that you have, whether it's Adam Scott, Billy Horschel, Rory, that the driver has gone from being one of the hardest clubs to hit to one of the easiest clubs in the bag to hit. And I think we've been pretty adamant on this podcast that we'd love to see the driver head shrunk or become less forgiving so that off-center hits find some more of those penalties, similar to how you're describing with the kind of architecture that you like to see. What is your reaction? Would you be in support of regulation change that shrunk the size of the driver head?
100%. I think that would be way more effective than what they're trying to do with the golf ball. I think, again, as you said, it would bring a lot more penalties of the team play. It would bring more skill to, driving the golf ball straight and long. I think, if I were to, to make the rules, I would definitely go down that path. I think it's something that amateur golfers won't probably enjoy, because for them it's easy with, these days with the big club heads and, just swing it and it doesn't really matter where you hit it. It goes somewhere straight. But I think for professional golf, I think that would be the way to go. Again, awesome. It's, it would bring a lot more skill back into the game for sure.
I think we need to see it desperately. I think it's a very under the radar issue that would significantly increase the entertainment value of the sport.
And I think it would solve as well a lot of issues, to be honest. It would solve the courses being too long or like too short for the modern player, because you won't be able to swing it at 130 miles per hour and, keep it on the planet. You would have to swing it a bit more like, a few years ago.
I'm with you. All right, let's get into the Ryder Cup section. This is the section of the pod that I believe Edoardo is going to dodge some of the questions, as he is an integral part of the brains of Team Europe. What was the first Ryder Cup that you were involved from an analytics side, Edoardo?
It was the one in Italy. It was the one in Italy. I never did anything before then. Just when, even before Luke, so when Henrik Stenson, he was captain, he knew I was working with some of the players, and we met a couple of times. He asked me, it was kind of a job interview. He asked me what I was doing, what I could provide to the team. And I guess he liked what I could do for them. And then he hired me and he named me vice captain. And then when Luke became captain, he called me the very next day. And I've known Luke for like 25 years probably, because we played amateur golf together. And the same thing, he asked me, what I could do. And obviously Luke was vice captain before in Whistling Straits and in Paris as well. So he knew what was going on there. And he said, I would like to, get your help and keep working with you. So, I did the last one in Rome. And obviously when Luke was named captain again, I remember the day before he was named captain, he sent me a very nice text saying, tomorrow I'll be announced as captain. But, I need you to be at my side from day one pretty much. So please, I would like you to be vice captain again. I said, yeah, of course. Fantastic. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you will be a part of the team at Bethpage for Team Europe.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions here. And again, feel free to disclose as much or as little as you'd like. Obviously, we're going for as much as possible, but we'll see what we can get. One view when you're making optimal pairings, it would be, hey, we're going to put together the best analytically, the best data-driven pairings, and we're going to tell you who to play with, and you're going to be fine with that, and you're going to go out and play well, right? Like that's probably in your head the ideal scenario. But like, let's say, for example, there are two golfers who really want to play well together, think they have extremely strong chemistry, but you might evaluate that they're a quarter of a shot, for example, disadvantage compared to the optimal pairing. I mean, does that chemistry matter to where it could actually, when you factor it in, outweigh that quarter of a shot? Like, how do you think about quantifying the chemistry and who people sort of on a subjective basis want to play with?
I think we find the chemistry that works a bit better with the data. I think that the great thing with Luke was that he was able to make decisions, and we made decisions all together as vice captains with him, taking into account all different bits and pieces. Obviously, we knew, which players wanted to play with who. We knew what the data was suggesting. But then there's a lot more things that go into it. That it's not only the data, it's not only the players. Then you have to look at what balls they use, do they play well together? Do they, are they friends? Are the wives getting along well? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in there. It's not only, obviously the data is a big part of it. And I felt like Luke was going very much with the data. Then there were some pairings that we had in mind that for one reason or the other we couldn't bring out. But again, I think you need to find the right balance between the data, what the data says, what the players tell you. Sometimes you might have a player or a pairing that looks unbelievable, but then they're not playing well, so all of a sudden you can't really use them together. It's a combination of things. I think that the big thing for us with the data was that we had a good plan. We stuck to the plan because obviously we got off to a great start, but it was avoiding some big mistakes or basically avoiding some big mistakes that were done before or that might have, been repeated in Rome. We just stayed away from, a couple of pairings that, sometimes the players want to play together, but you just explain to them, look, it's not going to work. So if it's not going to work, you're not going to look good. We're not going to look good. It's going to hinder the whole team. So you need to find, again, it's a fine balance. And I think one of Luke's best skills that week was just to find, everything he did was, from the communication to the players to, these little things, he was absolutely unbelievable. 10 out of 10.
So if somebody said, hey, team chemistry and partner chemistry is a massive factor, would you be more inclined to roll your eyes at that a little bit, or no, that, hey, there is some real credence to the chemistry that those two players have?
No, definitely. If you like to play with a certain player and you're friends with him and you feel like he brings out the best of you, great. But then again, I want to also see that the data doesn't say that, you're, out of 120 possible pairings or so, that you're not the 115th possible pairing. So, within certain limits, yes, you try and accommodate the players, you speak to them. But I think what we did is we started to look at the pairings very, very early. Luke started to talk with the players extremely early. So when we got to Rome, everyone knew exactly what was going to happen. There was no last minute guessing or no improvisation. I mean, it took us literally 5 minutes to hand in the pairings, simply because we knew exactly what we were doing, and it was pretty simple and straightforward. There was a lot of preparation. I mean, the weeks before were very busy. I think I couldn't make a cut for like a month before. It was like, trying to do this, trying to solve the pairings, trying to speak with the players, trying to speak with Luke. We were going to dinner with Luke pretty much every night. It was a lot of hard work before, and then once you get to the weekend of the Ryder Cup, hopefully most of your work is done and you just, see the players play and play well.
Yeah, I want to drill down just into that a little bit on the subject of sticking to the game plan versus taking in some of the information that you're seeing. So something that I think both sides tend to do is play everybody on the first day. Maybe not a requirement, but tends to happen. How much information do you think is contained in what you see from a player in one of those first opening sessions versus your priors? And hey, even if this golfer that we evaluated is probably our weakest link, like if he goes out and crushes it, are you saying to yourself, you know what, maybe he needs to get a little bit of more run the next 2 days? Or are you sticking to that evaluation that you had coming in?
Again, I think it's a bit of a balance between the two. But I think golf is a sport where when you have a good week, anyone can beat anybody. So I tend to say that if someone is playing really well and is confident in that environment, then you probably have to keep playing with him and find him a spot in the lineup every day. One of the reasons I think why everyone wants to play everyone the first day, and we usually do it, the American usually do it, is because the Ryder Cup itself is a very different environment to your day-to-day tournament, and you want to see how the player react in that. If someone might not be playing very well coming in, but then if you think about someone like Poulter or Sergio, they loved that environment, and it didn't really matter how they played before. As soon as they got somewhat of a decent start on day one, then they were incredible for the whole week. Other players might be the opposite. You might have a player who is playing great coming in, and then he just doesn't feel comfortable in that environment where everyone shouts and basically every golf shot feels like it's the Sunday of a major down the last hole. So you get players reacting a bit differently, and if there's no history in it, you want to see how they play. And I think that's the biggest reason why you try and play everyone on day one, and then you go from there a little bit.
Multiple different directions you can go with this question, but does experience in past team events matter, right? Because I think you often hear, hey, well, this player has a good record or solid strokes gained, right? That would be a better way to look at it in a Ryder Cup environment or in a President's Cup environment. But like, let's say you have player A who has a little bit of experience. They're maybe the same age. Both golfers are 27. Yeah. One has never played in that environment, so it's an unknown. One has played before. Yeah. How do you think about how that could break the tie or work in one's favor versus the other? Because then if you don't take the guy who's never played before, 2 years later, you might have the same situation again where you might be holding it against him that he hasn't had any team success.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, it's a fine line with these things. You have sometimes to go a little bit with your gut instinct, but also I'm not a big believer in, someone that has a great Ryder Cup record or a great President's Cup record, whatever. Because of that, he's going to play well in the next one. Because again, match play, golf is a fickle sport. Match play is a bit of a, I'm not saying a lottery, but it's like, it's different to 72-hole stroke play. It's very difficult. I mean, the data sample is so small, and you might have a great record because, you play against someone that, was just having a bad day and all of a sudden you get a point, but you might have been the second worst player on your team and you still get a point. So I'm not a big believer in, your previous record. I'm more a believer on how you've been playing recently and how you've been playing on that single week, to be honest.
That's one question I had for you. That's one question I have for you is that we talk about this cocktail of all the optimal pairings and who do they get along with. Do you think that a player's current form at this point is an underrated part of the puzzle from the way that people talk about it? Just straight up how they're playing.
Yes and no. Yes, it's underrated for sure because people think, player A has an unbelievable President's Cup record and, this pairing has been, almost unbeatable. So we should play them no matter what. And it doesn't really work that way, I think.
Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas, you don't have to react to that.
No, not necessarily to Justin Thomas. I mean, he didn't play in the first morning in Rome, and so we still won 4 matches. So maybe if he had played, we wouldn't have won 4. I don't know. I think again it's a very fine balance between all these things, and sometimes again you have to be lucky because everything looked like we were geniuses in Rome because we decided to start with foursomes because we set up the golf course in a certain way. But then again, maybe Victor doesn't chip in at the first, and then we lose that foursome. We lose another one. It's 2-all after the first morning, and it's a completely different Ryder Cup. So sometimes again it's fine lines. You try and shift the odds as much as you can in your favor, but there's only so much you can do. And at the end of the day, a player having a good day or a bad day can turn the tables pretty easily.
This is a complete hypothetical and definitely not happening in 2025, Edoardo. If a player was the captain and playing well enough to be on the team, do you think it is possible to succeed in both roles at the same time? That you could be both the captain making the decisions and a successful member playing on the Ryder Cup. Not that that's the scenario this upcoming year.
I think so, and I think it would be a fantastic. Way to go about the week.
Are you saying that from the perspective of somebody who wants Team Europe to win, or do you mean that sincerely?
Bit of both. I think it would be something unheard of, and it'd be a first. Never happened before, I think, in the Ryder Cup. So I would be very keen to see Keegan, playing and being a captain. I think he could. Honestly, I think he could do a good job. It's probably more difficult, yes, but deep down, I'm hoping he makes the team and see what happens.
All right, I want to ask you 2 more questions. One is abstract. If you were tasked with building a Ryder Cup venue for the 2041 Ryder Cup, probably none of the active players, or very few of them, would also be who we know of now would be playing 15, 20 years from now.
Fair enough. Yeah.
What would that golf course look like? Do you think there are reasons to believe that people who grow up in Europe might be more accurate, so you'd set it up that way? I mean, how do you think about a problem like that?
No, I would honestly, I would set it up in a way that is as neutral as possible, and you cannot really change it too much. Like, I would love to see a Ryder Cup on a course where home advantage is not, well, I think home advantage is big enough because of the crowds. And I think they should take away the course setup from the home team, to be honest. It's something that it can make quite a big difference, as it proved in the last few Ryder Cups. And again, I think, it's difficult enough to play in front of an away crowd, that you don't also need the golf course to be set up in the favor of the home team. I think they've taken away quite a few things already. Like in previous years, like if I'm talking 10 or 15 years ago, the home team could decide which tees they could set the pins. Sometimes they were the only one to know the pins that they were going to be used. So there was obviously too much of an advantage. So now they've taken away the tee boxes. You cannot choose which one to use, whether you want to move up a tee or not. You can't do it. You cannot decide on the pins. We are given the 5 pins at the beginning of the week that they're going to use in all the sessions. But you're not even told this is the Sunday pin, this is the Friday morning pin. You just know the 5 pins. That's it. And I think that's a very good way to do it. And I would try and do pretty much the same on the golf course. So I would build a golf course where, ideally there's only one tee, so that's it. You can't move it. And I would make it, a good match play course, as in a lot of holes where there's like either reachable par 4s with water or, reachable par 5s, with some penalty involved. I think Marco Simone, I think it was a great venue because of the back nine. The front nine was so-and-so, and we knew that we had a lot of data from the Italian Open in previous years, and there were not a lot of birdies and bogeys made on the first 7 holes. And then from the 8th hole onwards, if you look at it, it was either extremely difficult holes or birdie holes, but you could easily make a bogey on the same hole. There were holes where you could decide to go for it or to lay up. Like there was a lot of things happening from the 8th hole onwards. And I think that's a very good trait to have in a Ryder Cup course.
That will be one that somebody involved in informing Team Europe on the course setup, advocating to make it more of a neutral setup. I think that's something that will catch people's attention. I think a lot of people think that that's gone too far in that direction, that maybe the home crowd is enough of an advantage in and of its own right. So
yeah, the only thing I would add is that compared to, again, 10 or 15 years ago, the players now are much more similar. Like there's basically no difference in driving distance. There's hardly any difference in driving accuracy. You just try and find very small edges and very small areas where to make gains. So it doesn't make as much of a difference as many years ago, but also you have a lot more tools now than 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, you just knew how many fairways are we hitting, how many greens are we hitting, how many putts are we taking. Now you have, a lot more information about your own players, the opposition players. So you make more informed decision for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to keep you too long. I guess what I was kind of getting at with do you think Europeans will be more accurate 20 years from now is the way that the European courses are configured, that the golfers are growing up on, and maybe the air, it being a little windier, that you'd expect them to play a different style of game. You're saying, I don't think that's probably going to be true. Like you got the Højgaards, long hitters coming in, Ludwig, like we're probably going to see pretty similar skill sets. That's your opinion?
I would say, I think it's going to get more and more closer together. The thing is, most great European players, when they grow up, they immediately go to college when they're 18 in the US, and they learn to play the game that is played in the US, which, I take it is very different to what we play here. Like when I grew up, I played 90% of my golf on links courses, where basically you have to hit it low, hit it straight, doesn't matter how far you hit it, and you have to chip and putt well. And that's like the typical English player my age is still, it's not long, hits it low and chips and putt well. I think now the good English players that are coming on tour because they've been in college in the US and because they understand that it's a different game as a pro, they all bomb it, they all hit it high. It's completely different to how it was 20 years ago.
Well, Edoardo, I'm sure we could talk about a lot of these topics all day. I'll get you out of here with this. In your unbiased opinion, what is the final result to the point value of the 2025 Ryder Cup?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this. Before the 2023 Ryder Cup, I remember Luke asked me, "What's your prediction?" And I said to him, I think I might still have it in my pocket money. I said to him, I'm going to write it in a small piece of paper. I'm going to keep it in my pocket money, and I'm going to show it to you on the Sunday night when we finish. And I missed by half a point.
Oh.
So, I have a prediction for 25, but I'm not going to tell you. I can write it down if you want, or I can send you a text, and then you keep the text. And then September 25, you can reveal the text.
Sounds great. I'm going to hold you to that. Let's do it.
Yeah, fine. I'll send you a text as soon as we finish.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Edoardo. It's delightful chatting with you. Appreciate you coming on the Friday Golf Podcast and love to do it again.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me. And anytime we can do this again.
All right, Joseph. Great job with that Dodo Molinari interview. That was fascinating stuff. Let's get to recommendations.
I'm going to recommend the music of Sturgill Simpson, who I've kind of gotten into recently, and he's performing. To his show? I didn't get to go to his performance at ACL Austin City Limits, but I heard not only was that amazing, but this tour that he's been on, I'm seeing a lot of clips from it on social media. Looks absolutely incredible. Jealous of anybody who goes, and that's a great road trip soundtrack. His new album, I would recommend it for a setting like that. So I'm going to recommend Sturgill Simpson, Andy.
I'm doing a music rec too.
Okay.
So I had known of this band just through their collaborations with Leon Bridges. It's called Khruangbin. It's KHR. Let me just spell it for everybody.
I believe they're a Houston, Texas band.
Yeah, KHRUANGBIN. If you're like really into guitar, in like people that play the guitar, there's very limited vocals, and like them from like Texas Sun, the kind of like hit with Leon Bridges. It's a lot different than their other music, which is just like, it's like super guitar heavy, music heavy. I hadn't listened to a ton of them, but then I saw them play a show and I was like, whoa, really into their music, super talented, and excited to see them again and start to really dive in. But if you're like into just like guitar, limited vocals, this is a band to check out. All right, that does it for this episode of the Friday Golf Podcast. Big thanks to our producer, PJ Clark. Thanks, PJ, for putting this together. If you haven't yet, check out Club TFE. We have just a ton of stuff going up there. We've been adding some more member events, a lot more member events, small gatherings. I think we'll do a lot of those next year. We don't really publicize these publicly. They have very few spots, so it doesn't make sense to publicly put them out there on like an event calendar. But we are going to have a lot more of those next year. If you're a member, you just get emailed, hey, we have this set up. So we did some last week in northern Michigan. We'll have a couple in the southeast around our old Barnwell event, but we will continue to add more and more of these as we go. So check those out, and check out Club TFE if you're not already a member. Big thanks to everybody for supporting us. You join Club TFE at thefriedegg.com/membership. It's $120 for the year, $10 a month, and it really helps support us and helps us grow. So we will be back on Thursday. I think Garrett and I are going to do a architecture mailbag, and then we also have an interview with Jason Mearsman, one of the biggest characters I've met in the superintendent world. So they'll be fun. And thanks for listening.